Tonight, we will continue to look at evidence for John the Baptist and Jesus. John records that John the Baptist was baptizing at a location known as Bethany beyond the Jordan. This video will explore this important location through the lens of archaeology.
Bethany is one of the holiest places of Christianity, as it's the site where Jesus Christ was baptized and where John the Baptist preached.
Of course, the baptism site is one of the three central sites in importance to Christianity, because the moment Christ is baptized, that's the beginning of Christianity, that's the beginning of Christ's mission. So along with his birth in Bethlehem and the end of his mission in Jerusalem, the beginning of his actual mission starts in the Jordan River.
And this happened in Bethany behind the Jordan River. So there was a Christian tradition locating that spot. But now the problem, where is Bethany? Across the Jordan.
While one can assume the existence of a Bethany beyond the Jordan, it cannot be proven and is otherwise unknown.
Since the 4th century, many biblical scholars have been debating if a Bethany beyond the Jordan really existed. And if it did, were there any clues left to reveal its location? The modern history of Bethany beyond the Jordan began in 1897, when a scholar from Jerusalem traveled to the ancient town of Madaba and accidentally happened upon a mosaic map from the 6th century, which had been covered under plaster for hundreds of years.
Here we have a map of the Middle East. We have the Mediterranean Sea, the sea coast, just west. And here, at the edge, we have the desert. The center of the map is Jerusalem. You see, west and east of the river, there are some inscriptions. The first one is Bethabara. Since the 4th century, the place of the baptism of Jesus was known as Bethabara. East of the river, we have another inscription, the spring, which is now Sapsaphas. And from literary sources of the 6th century, we know that this name, Sapsaphas, was the name of Lavra, a Byzantine monastery, visited by pilgrims to commemorate the baptism of Jesus.
But why did the map use the name Bethabara instead of the original Bethany? The Christian tradition knew the place as Bethany until a church father came to the Holy Land seeking to identify the places named in the Bible.
About the 4th century, a church father named Origen was discussing where Jesus was baptized, and he was unaware of any Bethany beyond the Jordan. And so he found in some biblical manuscripts the name Bethabara, which he interpreted to mean house of preparation. This seemed to fit the baptism of Jesus. So he took this name Bethabara and continued to popularize the view that it wasn't Bethany beyond the Jordan, it was Bethabara.
Origen's understanding of the Hebrew word Bethabara was incorrect, since Bethabara means house of the crossing and refers to the place where the river Jordan miraculously parted as Joshua led the Israelites into the Promised Land. If Bethabara was in fact associated with a different biblical event, where was the baptism site supposed to be located?
The key phrase is Bethany beyond the Jordan. Beyond the Jordan is a phrase that would indicate it's not the Bethany of Jerusalem, but it's a different Bethany. It's a Bethany that is outside the land of Judea, beyond the Jordan. So that key biblical phrase, which is preserved in the best manuscripts, indicates that we should find Bethany to the east of the Jordan River rather than to the west side.
So in reality, the map was wrong. It read Bethabara and not Bethany, and placed it on the wrong side of the river. Yet it was accurate enough, when used together with ancient pilgrims' accounts, to lead explorers down to the area in 1899.
They read these two places near the river, so they went back to the pilgrims, following them, where could be located, and they found. They saw some ruins, but because of the war, such evidence, archaeological evidence, was completely forgotten.
Indeed, the Holy Land was shaken by 2 world wars and at least 3 major conflicts in 1948, 1967, and 1973.
Rebounding from their initial shock, the Israelis unleash a savage counterattack as one of history's most violent tank battles is joined.
As a natural boundary, the Jordan River area was subjected to endless upheaval. For much of the 20th century, archaeologists could not travel to the area where Bethany beyond the Jordan was suspected to be.
So when I started working at Mount Nebo, I started asking to go there. Only after the peace treaty of 1994, in 1995, I had the chance to speak with Prince Ghazi, and Prince Ghazi said, if it's for that, after 3 days we went down.
An historic peace agreement between Jordan and Israel in 1994 gave Father Piccirillo the chance to finally explore the riverbanks to search for Bethany beyond the Jordan. He received help from Prince Ghazi bin Muhammad, the nephew of King Hussein of Jordan.
It started in 1995. In 1995, I was the late King Hussein, my late uncle, so I was his cultural secretary. And I just happened to go to Mount Nebo. And I ran into Father Michel Piccirillo. He said to me, there's a spot that we know on the River Jordan. And this is where the baptism of Christ occurred. But we can't go there because it's mined and it's a military area. So I said to him, Father, listen, I can take you there. We'll coordinate with the army and they'll help us with the mines. So I said, okay, let's go.
After a century of wars, a Hashemite prince and a Franciscan archaeologist followed the traces of those early pilgrims down to the banks of the Jordan River. What they found would eventually change the history of Christian archaeology.
The first time I went to Prince Ghazi, I was myself, Prince Ghazi, and Father Eugenio.
They walked around and they started finding, just on the ground, in the open air, these massive mosaic patterns and what was clearly a church.
Prince Ghazi was joking to me, saying, Father Michele, better if you walk ahead because you have the Holy Spirit with you because of the mines.
But there were more than mines in the area. After that first visit, an archaeological team was sent by Jordan's Department of Antiquities to carry out a dig, and they met with local Bedouin tribes who knew the land intimately.
كان في واحد اسمه صالح يعقوب هون من العدوان بيحرث وبيفلح المنطقة. فسألنا يا شيخ صالح شو اللي عندك هون شو اللي فيه؟ قال والله أنا هون لي 50 سنة وما شفتش الأشياء اللي ورجتوني إياها اللي هي الفسيفسة والقطع.
يعني سنة 10 ولدت. هذه هي أرضنا. زرع والله زرعت 15 سنة ما في ناس. قال يا شباب في انتوا برايكم يعني تبعين حلال وتبعين كذا وبترعوا هنا وبترعوا هنا، ودنا منطقة فيها فخار هيك يعني قريب منكم، هون قريب منكم. قلنا والله في قريب منه هون. والله ركبنا في السيارة معاهم وطحنا.
I asked the local people, and among them Saleh Yaqub, what about this hell? And he said, this is Tel Mar Ilyas, Nabi Ilyas, or Elijah's hell.
The hilltop monastery they discovered was known as Elijah's Hill by locals and overlooked a green valley with 7 springs leading down to the Jordan River. Elijah was a prophet of the 9th century BC who, according to the Bible, ascended to heaven from this hill in a chariot of fire. The ancient pilgrims who came to Bethany beyond the Jordan mentioned in their accounts that Elijah's Hill was one of the sacred places of pilgrimage near the site of Christ's baptism. Was there a connection between Elijah's Hill and Safsafas? The archaeologists knew that if there was, the implications would be extraordinary.
أول يوم فكرنا إنه زي أي موقع عادي، يعني إنه الأرضيات الفسيفساء موجودة في كل مكان، يعني طلعت القصة وإلا هي معمودية كاملة متكاملة.
We found the remains of 3 reservoirs, 3 pools, and these pools really dated back to the late Roman, early Byzantine period, and I think this is used for baptismal purposes.
I was impressed by this water installations which has to do with the conveyance, storage, and distribution of water. So the numerous pools, cisterns, reservoirs, aqueducts, which indicates there were many monks and hermits living here.
The vast water system and complex of buildings on Elijah's Hill was a large monastery. According to Father Piccirillo's research, the monastery of Safsafas was founded in the 6th century in honor of John the Baptist by a wandering monk who had a vision of John on that very hill.
There is a story of a monk in a monastery in Jerusalem. So he decided to go to Sinai. He crossed the Jordan River, he became sick, and he entered the grotto, a cave. And during the night, he received a vision saying, stay here, because that's more important than the Mount Sinai. He said, why? I am John the Baptist, and this is the place where I met several times Jesus. So he accepted the vision, he remained there, he created a monastery, and this is the monastery of Safsafas, which is Bethany across the Jordan.
The site itself has been indicated on the famous Madaba mosaic map. And the place is mentioned here in Greek. It has a Greek label mentioning Ainun, that is now Safsafa. And then there is a semicircular structure from which water flows, maybe sort of a fountain. And that is the fountain which is mentioned by the numerous pilgrims and travelers who visited this site.
A 6th century pilgrim to the area said, "There is a place to the east, being about 2 bowshots from the river, where the prophet Elijah was taken up in a chariot of fire, and where John the Baptist had his cave."
There is a cave there, and in fact there's many caves in this vicinity. Later tradition has monks coming to this area and staying in the place of John, fasting, praying, studying the Bible, preparing themselves as John was preparing believers in his day.
This is the western side of Elijah's Hill. And we have here the cave where John the Baptist started his mission and preaching in the wilderness. And in the Byzantine period, they adopted this cave officially, and they built a church in front of it.
The monastery of Safsafas grew, and eventually the entire valley was filled with monks who dwelt where John lived and preached.
From the age of 3 or 4, he lived by himself in this wilderness, just with a stick and with a loincloth, and he was constantly thinking of God and constantly thinking of Christ.
He preaches repentance so that then people will be in a receptive mood to hear the fuller teaching that Christ will bring.
Well, John, of course, is that link between the old and the new. Jesus said he's the greatest of all prophets that have ever lived. And he holds the tension of both. For example, he doesn't wear the right clothes. He isn't in the temple. He's off in this wilderness place. People that think like John the Baptist end up in these out-of-the-way places because there's no room for them in the central part of society or religion.
John the Baptist was saying, in effect, to people, hey, clean up your act, behave righteously, and as a symbol of your intention to transform, here is the demonstration.
John the Baptist came there to prepare the road for Jesus. And the disciples asked Jesus that Malachi, he prophesied that Elijah will come back before Christ. Jesus told them that, in fact, he came back. And they understood that he was spoken about John the Baptist. The same spirit of Elijah was with John the Baptist to prepare his people for the coming of Jesus Christ.
A tradition of pilgrimage developed in Bethany beyond the Jordan, commemorating not only the site of Christ's baptism, but the place where Elijah ascended to heaven and John the Baptist preached. But what did it mean for them to visit a place they believed to be sacred? What did they expect to find when they went there?
Pilgrimage to a sacred site. You have to give up your time. You have to exert yourself. It can be very, very demanding. But in doing that, there is a spiritual feedback.
The written testimony of pilgrims was an important layer of evidence, which was used by archaeologists to bring them closer to identifying Bethany beyond the Jordan. The many pilgrims who visited the site in commemoration of Christ's baptism wrote careful and detailed descriptions of what they saw there.
The records of pilgrim travelers, pilgrim visitors who went to the site of the baptism, and they talk about going to a place on the east side of the river, the place where the Israelites would have crossed, a place where Elijah ascended. They talk about this as being the place of the baptism of Jesus on the east side of the river.
When you read pilgrims from the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century, the description of the places they gave in that time, now we find everything there.
Now, to exactly locate the place is a pilgrim, the pilgrim of Bordeaux. So in the 333, he went down to the Jordan River, and he says the place where Jesus was baptized is 5 miles to the north of the Dead Sea, exactly pointing where it was commemorated the baptism of Jesus.
Interesting visitor or traveler who visited the site in 530 is Theodosius. His account is quite interesting because he mentions that where the Lord was baptized beyond the Jordan, there is a little mountain from which the prophet Elijah was carried up to heaven.
The last pilgrim we have was in the 14th century. Poloner, somebody told him there are ruins of the Christian sanctuaries across the Jordan. He says, I didn't cross the Jordan River for fear of the tribes. So from the 14th century, you must wait until the discovery of the Madaba map.
If Bethany beyond the Jordan was a destination for pilgrims celebrating Christ's baptism, and if the monastery at Safsafas was home to a thriving community, how could the site disappear completely from Christian history from the 14th century until the beginning of the 20th? What dangers could have kept the pilgrims away?
During the Byzantine period, there was quite a bit of protection for Christians who wanted to travel to the holy sites. The church was strong in the Holy Land. All of that changed in 614 AD when the Persians conquered the Holy Land.
The invasion by the Sasanian Persians made the area dangerous. But just a few years later, Muslims coming out of Arabia took over the Holy Land. During their rule, Christians were protected and could visit the east bank of the river unharmed.
This area, what we call Jordan, was like a no man's land, accepted by both because of the pilgrims.
A Crusader prince broke the truce with the Muslims protecting the pilgrims, leading to the reconquest of Jerusalem by the famous Salah ad-Din in 1187. More crusades were launched from Europe, and the Holy Land was plagued by endless skirmishes and battles, making the area around the Jordan River dangerous and uncertain.
As a result, people were reluctant to go to these biblical sites because of the physical dangers involved.
Thereafter, the eastern bank would gradually become a wilderness once more, controlled only by local tribes and forgotten by the world. The upheavals throughout the centuries had proven too much for pilgrim visitors, so the sanctuaries faded from memory. The quiet history of pilgrims to the east went silent, but the discovery of the Madaba map in 1897 opened the way for Christians to begin slowly returning to Bethany beyond the Jordan.
في الناحيه الشرقيه في اللي هم ايش هيك قفف زي غرف بنص الجبل
بيخش جوا كان بيخش جوا هيك وبيتعبدوا فيها الله. كنا صغار لابسين اسود هيك اسود مثل اسود هيك لابسين ولهم ملحي هيك.
Saleh Yaqub, who lived and farmed around Elijah's Hill, remembers Christian visitors coming back to the area in the 1920s when it was still under Ottoman Turkish rule.
احنا من يوم 20 25 واحنا هناك سكنين ونروح ونجي عليه وهذا يقولوا لك هذا يقول لك ودوا يبنى هانا كنيسة وفحر الأساسات بس يوم صارت كسرت تركيا راحت صارت فوضى.
After another century of conflict, peace finally returned to the Holy Land in 1994, allowing archaeologists to make the historic discoveries of Elijah's Hill and John the Baptist's cave. But other sanctuaries, and perhaps the very site of Christ's baptism, still lay hidden somewhere on the banks of the Jordan River.
نقب أول ما نزل نقب الدكتور محمد وهيب نقب على الكنيسة اللي فوقها. أجيت أنا والحجي حكى له وقال له في كنيسة تحت على المية على النهر.
We reached a place there on the eastern bank of Jordan River, and he told me, here I know some remains now disappeared.
The remains the Bedouins knew about were not easy to get to, and in those early days the area was still a military zone and had not been totally cleared of landmines.
كنا قاعدين بنفطر ساعة فطور يعني ساعة غدا هيك غدا في جاية سيارة الدكتور علينا
وقف على الهاج
صف السيارة قبل ما ينزل من السيارة وهو اللغم يشيل والله ارتفعت حوالي مترين فوق في الجو. احنا هيك الكل راح لها والحمد لله وين ما فينا شيء.
Despite that incident and the clear dangers of the site, the archaeologists persevered, searching for clues in the thick underbrush.
فزميلي والله الدكتور أصر إلا إنه نبحث. أنا والله الحقيقة بالنسبة لي يعني كنت أتراجع. كان لي إخوان اثنين في السبعينات توفوا نتيجة أحداث، وأنا كنت يعني متردد لأنه يعني ما كنت حاب أستمر في هذا الوضع. الدكتور والله شجعني اعتبار إنه بصير اكتشاف وحدث عظيم.
As the team started digging down by the river, the remains of a large structure that seemed to be a church started to appear in the ground. This was obviously a dramatic breakthrough, but what church could this be?
The Emperor Anastasius built a church dedicated to the memory of John the Baptizer. That church was east of the Jordan and at the site of the baptism.
جابوا منها شقيله وبحاجوا اطلعوا الكنيسه هذه كنيسه مريم مدري كنيسه الصلاه
وتم العثور على التاجيه وبعد التاجيه قطع من الماربل.
And we found remains of column, remains of scattered pottery shards, marble pavements, mosaics, caves of the hermits.
And then they start discovering more and more things in the area. They said, look, this is a major find. This is something that goes back to the 3rd century. This is St. John's Church.
Pilgrims' accounts reaching back 1,500 years describe the sanctuary called the Church of John the Baptist, noting that it was near where Christ himself was baptized. The archaeological team knew that they might have been on the brink of a discovery of fundamental importance, not just for archaeology, but for Christianity itself.
So then I went back to my uncle, and he said, so Ghazi, any new projects? Literally, those were his words. So I said, yes, Your Majesty, I think I'm onto something big. He said, what? Well, you know, we think we've discovered where Jesus Christ, the Messiah, was baptized.
The first church described here was in the year 530 by Theodosius, who said the following. He said, 5 miles north of the Dead Sea, there's the Church of John the Baptist, and it's marked by a marble column on which there's an iron cross.
Further excavations revealed an elaborate series of foundations dating from the 3rd century. In fact, what they found were the remains of 5 different churches built one after another on the same spot. The pilgrims' accounts describe the sanctuaries as being next to the river. So why were they making these discoveries on dry land, 500 meters from where the river was flowing?
Now, the river isn't as big as it was 2,000 years ago. So the eastern bank has shrunk. Now the eastern bank is on dry land.
We should always keep in mind the River Jordan has changed its course over the centuries. So it is maybe a little bit further removed than it was in the 6th or early 7th century. Also, many earthquakes, powerful earthquakes, in fact, hit the Jordan Valley.
The river was passing just here, just to the west of these churches, and they caused the undermining of the foundations of these churches and their destruction.
A sequence of churches are built there, they're washed out, and they're still rebuilt and continue to be rebuilt, meaning that somebody really thought that was the place.
The early Christians built their churches in this spot where there's no community. And we should ask ourselves, why was this? Why did they insist to build their churches at this spot in particular? The reason is obvious. They wanted to mark something.
A clue to what the Christians were seeking to mark was a uniquely placed gate. According to pilgrims' accounts of St. John's Church, there was a gate that opened to stairs leading down to the river.
We have a gate that is built east of the Alps, and that makes it something unique too, because you never have churches that have a gate to the east, because the easternmost point of any church is its Alps.
I think it was Arculf who says, after staying a night at the monastery of John the Baptist, you walk down to the river, and then he says there are marble steps on both sides of the river which lead down to the water, and above the water there are stone bridge carried on arches.
At the end of those churches, as you go down the ramp and down the stairs, you come to a place where there are now left only these piers. And those piers had the mother of all canopies over it.
These are the steps that were described by Antoninus of Piacenza in the year 570, who said that marble steps lead you to the bank of the river where the Lord was baptized. We have discovered the remains of 4 piers, symmetrical with a staircase. What in essence we have is a gateway for pilgrims to come through, arriving at the center of these 4 piers. If you look at it in plan, it is a cross. So that makes it a unique cruciform baptismal font. Actually, it's the only cruciform baptismal font on earth that used the River Jordan to baptize in.
That seems to have been the place where in the 3rd, 4th century people really commemorated the baptism. But more than that, they went there to be baptized. And as they came out of the site, they drew these tiny little crosses on the plaster, on the canopy.
And on this plaster, we have thousands and thousands of cross marks left by the pilgrims who were baptized at this point.
The first level of evidence is the evidence of the Bible itself. Very clear that it all happened on the East Bank. The second level is the archaeological evidence. The third level is the history and the tradition. And then the fourth level is the pilgrims' accounts, because we have very early pilgrims' accounts throughout the century, saying where exactly, X marks the spot, the baptism occurred.
Epiphanius, for example, mentions 60,000 pilgrims holding candles at Epiphany, here at this point. So in fact, all the 5 churches are connected to this point. This is because that's the place that they believe Jesus was baptized.
And it came to pass in those days that Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized of John in the Jordan. And immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens rent asunder, and the Spirit as a dove descending upon him.
The whole Old Testament and the whole New Testament are there together. There is no separation with Moses, Elijah, John the Baptist, Jesus, the disciples. It is one thing.
Can I speak to people and say, this is where it happened? No. Because who am I to say these things? Do I have any doubt? Am I certain that this is where it happens? I have no doubt. I am certain.
It's been exciting to follow the excavation there and see that caves and churches and some foundations have been discovered in this site, exactly where I would have expected it to be. And this is archaeological confirmation of the early Christian tradition and of the biblical text, which would identify this place as the place of the baptism of Jesus.
We in Jordan are honored by our custodianship of this place and many other sites of religious significance. And it's our lasting duty to maintain these for the benefit of our people and for the benefit of the many visiting pilgrims and tourists from all over the world.
Today the site in Jordan is overseen by a royal commission created by the late King Hussein and continued under King Abdullah II. It is visited by hundreds of thousands of people each year. The area is now a national park and is being maintained as it was found, a wilderness.
As we can see, John the Baptist and Bethany beyond the Jordan is well confirmed by archaeology.